We didn't have anybody call in or give notice, right? That they weren't be able to make it tonight? Lori, you're muted.
Bob Williams will not.
Okay. So just Bob?
Good.
Okay. Can we make Terry an honorary member of Plan Commission? And he's been in so many meetings. Otherwise, we're going to struggle to get a quorum here.
In other communities, whenever there's no quorum and the plan commissioners didn't show up, we always assign them homework that they have to complete by the next meeting.
Just to the ones that don't show up, though.
Yep, exactly. So Peter, Peter, you're good. Yeah.
Let the record show that I'm here.
All right. Matt, welcome, Matt.
Hi, everybody.
There's Bill.
Good morning, good evening.
Good evening. It gives us 4. We can start, right?
That's it. Yep.
Okay. All right, with that then, welcome, Bill. With that, I'll call the meeting to order. We got a meeting of the Plan Commission on Monday, February 22nd at 6:30 p.m. This meeting is being held as a virtual WebEx meeting only. This meeting has been given public notice in accordance with Wisconsin statute sections 19.83 and 19.84 in such form that will apprise the general public and news media of subject matter that is intended for discussion and action. Roll call shows all Plan Commissioners members present except for Trustee Baum and Trustee Baum and Plan Commission member Leszewski and Mr. Williams. And Mr. Williams is excused. Perhaps the other two will be joining us shortly. So at this time, we'll go to public input or public appearance. Is anyone that wishes that is on the WebEx that wishes to be part of the public input or public appearance is welcome to do so. All I would ask is that you make your wish known to Emily Zant so that she is able to bring you forward in regards to public input or public appearance. Is there anyone wishing to come forward for public input or public appearance at this time? No?
Hi. Oops.
Ms. Miller, is that you?
Yes.
Okay, and you'd like something to say in public input, public appearance?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Good
absolutely.
evening. Good evening, everyone. Good to see everyone. I just had a couple of comments. I'm sure you're going to cover it going forward, but I thought I'd ask my questions in advance so that you could answer them as you go along with the presentation. The great presentation. In point number 2, it said, what have we heard so far? And I just wanted an understanding about was the information that they're gathering and presenting based on 2020 participants or 2019 participants from those meetings, and how many participants from the village of Germantown gave feedback. And then in your point number 4 in the great presentation, it says it's an interactive map on the social point, pinpoint, and apparently there's going to be training on that. That's great. And you mentioned that they residents could put in their own pictures, and I just want you to explain that. Meaning, does that mean you could put in pictures of your own that you took, or will there be additional pictures that Grafe has available, like on the side, to put in to the presentation? Will they be canned, in other words? And their point number 5 was an introduction of opportunity areas. There was only one map that was included in the agenda packet. So I wasn't clear on what those areas might be. That would be interesting to know. And there is a rating on different buildings that are present in Grafe's presentation in 1 through 10. And it says Village Center on Mequon Road. So Mequon Road is a long road. It's miles long, few miles long. So I was wanting to understand what the North and South Street might be. And then number 11, it said Holy Hill Industrial Area. Is that for just light or just heavy industrial or both? And in your points number 19 through 22, you've got the Northwest Rural Preservation District. When we talk about preservation, does that mean that it is or has been reviewed by the DNR? It's a question. Is it under some sort of restriction or conservation that we should be aware of, including wetlands? And then finally, on your last page, where you do have the nice picture of Germantown and all the future land use colors, on the bottom of the page, it actually says scenario planning map 8-3, or I couldn't read everything, but I thought it said 2010 to 2020. So is that an old map? Is this the new one that we're talking about? So if you could clarify that. And my overall questions, briefly, does Grafe have a staff landscape architects, multiple architects that are actively involved in the Germantown Comprehensive Plan? If not, why not? If so, what's their role? And then I wanted to understand, hopefully you get a lot of people on the social pinpoint in March. Is there any limit to the amount of people that could be on that social pinpoint? And that's all. And if you could answer those questions, I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to come forward at this time for citizen input, public input, or public appearance? Anyone else wishing to come forward?
Dean, this is Jeff.
Yes, sir.
I'm looking for some clarification from Jan Miller on her questions, so we're in a better position to answer them. Can she tell us to what document or presentation she's referring to? She mentioned numbers 2 and 5, 1 to 10, and 19 to 22. What document or what pages are you referring to?
Ms. Miller?
Sorry, I took this out of the, I just sent it to you, Jeff. I completely forgot to send this to you. I wrote it all out. I just emailed it to you. It's based on the Grafe presentation, the outline that you're going to go through in the packet, in the agenda packet. So where it starts Grafe in the agenda packet, there's a point number 2. What have we heard so far?
Okay,
That's where it's from, Jeff.
all right.
Thanks for asking.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else, Emily, that wishes to come forward for citizen input or public appearance?
I don't see anything from anyone else.
Okay. Then with that, we can go into the next item on the agenda, which is the approval of minutes from the February 8th, 2021 Plan Commission meeting.
Move approval as submitted.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion to approve the minutes from the February 8th meeting? No discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Wait, this is Jeff.
Yes.
Sorry, can I jump in with a comment?
Sure.
On page 2 of the minutes, under the item, the Village of Germantown Village Hall monument sign,
Mm-hmm.
there's a sentence in there where it talks about, I think this is referring to David Baum. He said the Building Oversight Committee had reviewed the sign. Trustee Baum was concerned with the aesthetics of the tower element and asked if the manufacturer can show photos of something done that's similar. His main concern was that the dark bricks look like a brick enclosure as opposed to a solid panel with dark brown squares on it. Ultimately, the motion was to approve, but with to include a masonry base. How do you want us to proceed with that? Do you want us to get photos or examples of existing signs that are proposed with the same aluminum framework to show you again, or I'm not sure how to take this.
I would say if you can get samples from the manufacturer, that would be adequate.
Okay, but let's say we get those and we present those to the Plan Commission and you're not satisfied. Right now, there's a motion to approve, presumably as it was presented. So did you really mean to approve it, or did you want to see those materials first before you approved it?
I'd like to see the materials first before the approval goes through.
So
It's like a shop drawing. Give me a shop drawing. It's approved, but if the shop drawing is bad, then we can withdraw our approval.
Right, okay. I kind of figured you'd want to see the samples before you approved it, but we did take action to approve it. So
Yeah.
do you want to undo that now since it's the next meeting, or how would you like to proceed with that?
What's the tech thing that we have to do? If I have to
reconsider.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to reconsider.
The motion would need a second.
Okay.
Okay, motion made and seconded to reconsider, and you're reconsidering, any discussion on that motion to reconsider before we get into discussion why? And then the vote would be to actually open it back up for reconsideration, so everybody understands. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? None opposed? Motion passes for reconsideration. So based on that, your outline for reconsideration would be?
To make the approval contingent on our acceptance of a manufacturer's submittal of product being installed.
Okay, so do you want to change the motion for approval to it's based off of that, or are we going to take a look at it and then go through motions again to approve?
Yes, we'll go through motions again to approve once we get the manufacturer samples.
So you're really postponing?
Yeah, I think you have to, since we didn't schedule this for action on tonight's agenda.
Right.
So you need a motion to postpone till I'll
Do we
make a
have the
motion
samples?
to postpone this until after the manufacturer can submit samples for Plan Commission review.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Discussion, or if anybody needs clarification? No discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any opposed? Opposed? Motion carries. Now back to the motion to approve the minutes. Further discussion? No further discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes from the February 8th planning meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any opposed? None opposed? Motion carries. That then takes us to new business with new business, item A, Community Development Department 2050 Comprehensive Plan Discussion. We have 2 points there, future land use, neighborhoods, districts, corridors, and number 2 is March 22nd, community workshop. So at this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to our Community Development Director, Jeff Retzoff.
Thank you, Dean. I'll lead off the discussion and I'll turn it over to Craig. The major topic I'd like to talk about tonight is our rural preservation district. It's the northeast portion of the village on the neighborhood district and corridor map. It comprises probably 35% of the total village area. So it's a significant area. It's predominantly undeveloped. It is designated on our current 2020 plan as our agricultural / conservation residential area, and has been designated as such since 2004. At that same time, the village adopted a new policy that effectively allowed a higher density of development, residential development in that area compared to what it was previously. Previously, it varied from 1 per 10 acres to 1 per 20 acres. But ultimately in 2004, the policy was changed as part of the future land use planning and mapping effort to allow for a density of 1 per 5 acres with a minimum lot size of 5 acres. And that's the way it's been ever since. Now, interestingly enough, we're talking about now as part of our 2050 plan of taking the concepts that were kicked around in the 2020 plan and implementing them to the fullest extent with respect to conservation, subdivision, and residential development. I think I mentioned somewhat ironically, we developed this agricultural conservation preservation district in the plan, the 2020 plan that was adopted in 2004. And our first 2 technically conservation subdivisions were Prairie Glen and Meadow Creek Crossing, both of which were approved and developed before the 2020 plan was adopted. We in fact received some commendations from the then Governor Scott McCallum for pursuing smart growth development concepts and utilizing essentially the conservation subdivision type approaches towards residential development. But since then, we really haven't developed any conservation subdivisions. We've added on to Prairie Glen, but even the addition to Prairie Glen doesn't reflect the same conservation subdivision approach that was taken with the original Prairie Glen, nor what we're contemplating now. So I think it's important that we talk about it tonight and that we go into our community meeting in March and beyond with a thorough understanding of what it is that we're proposing, because frankly, I think it is going to receive a lot of attention, commentary, and maybe even some negative feedback with respect to what we're proposing to do. But again, it is an important area for the village, and the concepts that we're talking about, the conservation subdivision approach to development in the rural preservation district, doesn't stop there, because we're talking about applying the same concept to some of our rural neighborhoods, specifically the Rockfield, Isabel Farms, Dinesville, the Mount Brook, Wiedenbach, and Amy Bell neighborhoods, all of which are currently lie outside of, in whole or in part, outside of the sewer service area. but will be subject to development pressures as we go forward. So we're talking about applying the same conservation subdivision development approaches to those areas as well. So with that, I would like to turn things over to Craig. And Craig, if you could carry on our conversation.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Dean. And good evening, Plan Commission. Again, my name is Craig Huebner, urban planner with Grafe. What I'm going to start with tonight is actually materials that did not make it into your packet ahead of time, so I apologize. And then what we'll come back to at the end is what was in your packet, which is just a rough outline of the March 22nd meeting, as well as some potential examples for a visual preference survey. As I'm talking here tonight, I am kind of remoting in to my desktop. So if at any point someone has a comment, please just interject. I won't be able to see the chat function as easily as I typically can. So on my screen right now, I have Village of Germantown. Everyone see that?
Yes.
Perfect. So a couple things, there's just 9 slides that I wanted to go through to talk about, again, the Rural Preservation District and specifically conservation subdivision planning. As you've seen in the past, these are 3 maps. The far left is your existing zoning map. And then in the middle is your existing land use as it was included in your current comp plan. And then on the far right is the future land use map that was part of your current comprehensive plan. And this last far right image is what we're in the process of updating, as you all know, with our comprehensive plan update. And again, the intent and idea that we're moving forward with this comprehensive plan is the idea of neighborhoods, districts, and corridors that work as your future land use map to guide future zoning considerations. What I wanted to reintroduce, and this was on the last page of your packet, is on the left again is in your current comprehensive plan, what the future land use states is different future land use categories, different densities of residential and non-residential uses and where they occur. And you can see what essentially was in your current plan is everything more or less north of Freistadt was this rural preservation, which Jeff has mentioned. And what the right side here represents is basically an example development scenario based off of densities. So what we understand looking at the Department of Administration, which is one way to forecast how a village is going to grow, is the DOA is projecting that Germantown will grow by an estimated 2,100 housing units by the year 2040. So what Grafe did is basically take that number of 2,100 housing units and gave different scenarios of if that developed all as your 5-acre rural residential area, it would need to consume over 10,000 acres of land, which is essentially the entire northern half of your village. If it was developed all as 1-acre size lots, similar to your current rural residential density, it would consume 2,100 acres, which you can kind of see as you progress down. Basically, the higher density, the smaller footprint that it would have an impact for this projected 2,100 housing units. Now, it's obviously, we don't want development to occur only in one of these different scenarios. This is meant to more portray that it's important to have a mix of different densities throughout the entire village and not just one type of density, whether that's low or high, to provide variety, but also preserve the rural character of our northeast corridor or northeast area of the village. So looking specifically then at what we're defining as our neighborhoods, districts, and corridors map, in the far northeast corner and northern areas of the village, we are defining this area as a rural preservation district. And the narrative, basically how this would come up as your future land use designation, is this area is meant to accommodate the existing agricultural uses as well as low density residential development either as single lots or as what we're proposing conservation subdivisions. The change here from what's existing, as Jeff referenced, is right now the density for this area is at a density of 1 unit per 5 acres with a minimum lot size of 5 acres. And what we're proposing as part of this plan is down on the bottom left here. The proposed density would be that for a CSM or any single lot up to 4, that the density would be 1 unit per 20 acres instead of that 5 acres. And then if a subdivision was planned, meaning more than 4 acres, that it would be required to be a conservation subdivision. And that density of the conservation subdivision could be this 1 unit per 5 acres, again, similar to the density that exists today. What I am going to walk through just on the next couple of slides is some examples of some specific sites in the Rural Preservation District to help you kind of understand what this new regulation would look like compared to what it is today. Before I do that, just a reminder again, I think all of you are now very familiar with the idea of conservation subdivisions, but this is just a diagram showing again the comparison on the top of a conventional or traditional subdivision versus a conservation or cluster subdivision. So this is an example where it's 2 exact same pieces of property. The top is one way it could develop as a conventional subdivision, and the bottom is a conservation subdivision. They both have the exact same density on here, which is 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres. But you can obviously see the difference in how this gets developed. On the top, every single lot occupies the entire area with natural open space basically being left aside, and maybe some individual property owners have some natural areas, but it really does not have a comprehensive look in how to preserve natural features. The bottom does the exact opposite. It preserves existing farmstead, pasture areas, waterways, steep slopes, and even some crops or ag land, while still, again, having the exact same amount of lots and density of 1 unit per 5 acres, but it essentially has smaller lot sizes. The top shows 4-acre lot sizes, and the bottom shows half-acre lot sizes. So what could this look like for the village of Germantown? So what this slide is showing is one area within the village. It's a little bit hard to see, so I apologize, but on the bottom of each image here is Freistadt Road. And Jeff, correct me if I'm incorrect, but Mary Booth is the far east road here. And then, what is it, Jeff, here? Pleasant View Drive, I believe. Yes, Pleasant View Drive. And then right in the middle is Lover's Lane, just to kind of get a sense. So Jeff helped identify just 3 properties. These are not properties that have necessarily expressly expressed interest in redevelopment or different development, but it was more looked at as currently vacant or large farmstead areas that potentially could see redevelopment. So what we wanted to do is give you an example of, based off of the existing regulations and then what the proposed development regulations, what would we see as far as different development makeup. So on the far left column here is your existing future land use regulation again, which is 1 unit per 5 acres. So with the different areas in area A, if we follow that guideline, it would allow for 6 5-acre lots. In area B, it would allow for 19 5-acre lots. And in area C, it would allow for 13 5-acre lots. Moving on to the items in red here, this is what we're proposing as consideration for the Plan Commission and the village as a whole. This first middle column would be anything that would be 4 lots or less, again, of a subdivision. And the proposed density here is 1 unit per 20 acres instead of that 1 per 5 acres. What that 1 per 20 basically says is that we want this to be much more of a rural open space, preservation of existing natural features. And this is one way to do that, to really increase the amount of, or lower the density that would be allowed. So with that, potential, the 1 to 20, the potential development in area A, again, the top here, would be 1 lot could fit within that area. In area B, it's 4 lots could fit within there at about 20 acres each. In area C is 3 lots within there. So you can already see a difference, obviously, of how many lots can be created as one potential option of a 4 lots or less land division. On the far right shows then what potentially could be a way for landowners to reach again the original type of number of lots, which is a conservation subdivision, so anything above 4 lots. And the maximum density is again 1 to 5. But the key difference here is that we would reduce the minimum lot size and not have it as a 5-acre minimum lot size. And what it would do with a conservation subdivision is you could again get 6 lots in area A. In area B, it's 20 lots. In area C, it's 13 lots. So it gets again basically to what the existing regulation is. If subdivisions are proposed here, the only key difference is that it needs to be a conservation subdivision. And my next slide, and then I'll stop talking, is going to just give you kind of one example of that in one of these areas. So again, this is, if I just flip back, this is area A. It's right on the north side of Lover's Lane between, again, Mary Booth and Pleasant View. This tract of land is just above 33 acres in size. So this is a 33-acre area. There's an existing farmstead home right in the middle here. So again, with our existing land use regulation, we could fit 6 lots, all about 5 acres in size, maybe a little bit larger, on this property, and it would require a new cul-de-sac road basically to access all these different lots. Now, what are the positives and negatives to this? Well, when you look specifically at the natural environment here, there's an existing primary environmental corridor that runs through here. So it basically would split apart that, and each individual property owner would have their existing access to some of this natural area, but it's divided and it's not really embraced as kind of a cohesive element that would potentially have access to all these property owners or even the public. The other potential downfall when we look at the entire rural preservation area is lots 1 and 6 basically would be very visible from Lover's Lane. You would get residential developments here that are viewable from the public and starts to deteriorate the existing agriculture or rural open space look for this area. Moving on to the middle scenario here. So let's say the property owner said, no, I just want to create a single lot here for and sell it off to another user. Well, currently they could do that as a 5-acre lot, but what we're proposing is that instead of a 5-acre minimum lot size, it needs to be 20 acres in size. And what this 20 acres would basically allow for is only one lot on here, one additional lot for a residence. And what that ends up doing, the last bullet point here, is basically maintains or makes sure that there's a little bit more of this existing rural character or even some of this ag land, basically a buffer space from the public view that still maintains an open rural character of this development area. And then the final solution here on the far right side would be if the property owner wanted to pursue a conservation subdivision. So this again would be over 4 lots in size. So what this is showing again with this 33 acres is 6 lots, but instead of taking up the entire property, the lot sizes are reduced to a 1/2 acre in size. And what this allows for is protection of this existing environmental area where all of these property owner or new property owners lots would have shared access to this open space and or village access to this open space, depending on what agreement is come up with this developer. So you can see in both of the 2 proposed solutions, the intent with this, again, is to really, how do we maintain our rural character in this northeast corner of the village? So that's the kind of background and reasoning as to this changes here. It can be discussed and argued, you know, what truly maintains that rural character best. So that's what I think Jeff and Grafe really want to hear from you as the Plan Commission. If we think that these potential proposed regulations would indeed preserve the intent and character that we want to see in the Rural Preservation District. With that, I'll maybe stop talking. I know, Jeff, we can talk about maybe some more, but I talked a lot, so I'll stop here and maybe ask if there's any questions or clarifying items I can do.
I've got a question about those smaller lots in that northern area of the village. You know, is that area served by sewer? And if not, is, you know, half-acre lot big enough to put a septic type system on?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's important to note that the 5 acre minimum lot size Craig has in his examples here represent probably truly the absolute minimum that one could develop in the village of Germantown, given our general soil characteristics. We're certainly going to have to, you know, take a closer look at what what's a little bit more realistic. I don't know if establishing or setting a half acre or 3/4 of an acre is appropriate at this point. I think one of those two is probably best, knowing that there may be areas in the village where that just can't be achieved because of the soil characteristics. And that may eat into the total number of lots that may be able to develop, assuming there's a minimum open space requirement, whether it be 30% or 40% or 60%. Those certainly are some things we need to consider. And a couple other points. I think we need to also keep in mind that when we're talking about creating little cluster subdivisions on an individual cul-de-sac, those may very well be private roads, much like if you envision the Appleworks winery that we just processed in the last couple of months. There, the owner had split off 3 5-acre lots with a shared driveway that was constructed to a greater than a sort of a driveway standard, but is similar to this development scenario Craig presents in the graphic there, just with 3 instead of 6 lots. But in that case, the lot size would be relatively smaller, and the ability to preserve more open space in a common open space area owned in common by all the lot owners would be the resulting type of development.
I have some questions. So, Jeff, what is the criteria for having a horse in the village on my personal property?
Well, right now for having a horse, you need to have a minimum. You need to be essentially in the RS3, I believe it's the 1 acre district, the RS2, 2 acre district, the RS1, 5 acre district, or one of the 2 agricultural districts in order to raise or keep horses.
So can anybody in column 3 here have a horse?
I would say in the way that other communities approach this, and what Germantown would want to consider, is the potential for either a new zoning district or a new, basically, regulation that discusses those specific types of activities that can occur within the newly created open spaces. So it may differ than what your current is, but that should be a conversation with this shared open space is that basically allowed to have different activities, one of them being horse trails or horse ownership.
One of the options under the current code would be to create a planned development district overlay that would apply in this particular example, where it specifies that horses could be kept on the properties provided there's certain amount of area set aside or separation between where the horses are kept and adjacent dwellings, or whatever the regulations might be that we set up, essentially a equestrian neighborhood of sorts that would allow that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a bigger issue that needs to be hashed out with this scenario is you want the rural character as horses. Not everybody has a horse, but a lot of people out here have horses. We need a lot that allows them to have a horse without having to go through and change all of our codes. Then can you go ahead, Jeff?
I was just going to say the other option is to simply create a 20-acre parcel in a similar manner.
Yeah, but I don't want 20 acres. I only want enough to get me and a couple of horses. So that goes back to column 1. Give me my 5 acres and I can have a couple of horses. Craig, can you back up a slide to the 3, A, B, and C? Okay, Jeff, which one of these areas has the farm to table restaurant on it?
The farm, you mean the old Germantown place?
Yeah, the new place that we just approved a couple years ago.
It's just off the graphic. You see the A parcel?
Yep.
The northwest corner of that?
Yep.
If you move your hand diagonally right there, that property is where it sits. It's on that property right there.
After listening to the Apple Winery and the debacle that happened there, if I put in another private drive near that place, we're going to start to have problems with that place. So I'm not sure, I initially thought I liked this conservation subdivision, but now I'm starting to see all the problems with it. So,
well, what were the problems, David?
What were the problems?
For instance,
what was that, Jeff?
I'm just curious what all the problems are.
Yeah, Dean, what did you say?
I said, for instance, some examples of problems.
For instance, okay, go forward one slide to this conservation subdivision. Basically, I have what's in column 3, and it's a private road with lots on it, and it's next to a business. And now the private roads have $500,000 houses on it, and now they're opposed to that business expanding. So how do I overcome conflict of those two adjacent conflicting desires?
Well, I guess first of all, I would say that with respect to the rural preservation area, we're probably placing a priority on the preservation of the rural character and appearance and quality of life, and probably not stressing so much the business aspect of things. I guess where it gets a little hazy is in that tourism business category, like the old Germantown and like the winery. I think we need to look at that type of land use a little bit more comprehensively and proactively, and as a result of the Appleworks winery situation, maybe come up with some specific criteria under which we would permit that type of development, and use that to determine where future agribusiness type uses can go, as opposed to using that as what's driving what type of rural residential development will allow and where.
Okay. And is the private road scenario the right way to handle a conservation subdivision?
I can speak to that, Jeff, and you can add. So it definitely would not need to be the approach always. This specific property, it maybe makes sense because it's a short cul-de-sac configuration. But for instance, we didn't draw it up, but in areas B and C, you would likely see at least a connection potentially to 2 major roads where it would make sense, potentially to have a regular public street. So it depends on a case-by-case scenario. You see both. Sometimes with conservation subdivisions, if they are kind of this PUD type development, is your streets will also not necessarily be designed to village standard. So that's another potential of why you would see these more often being private roads, but it's not a requirement by any means.
And
Yeah, David, I would ask you to think back to a couple meetings ago when we were talking about the Holy Hill area, and we showed some concept development plans, some layouts, if you will, for future conservation type residential development around the Isabel Farms development. Um, in that instance, you know, the areas was 80 acres in size. Um, and there were a couple, if not two or three different road connections to the existing local street system. And in a case like that, I would expect those roads to be public roads.
yeah,
But in a situation like the small, you know, 6 lot or under type development, like the Appleworks Blossom Lane, you know, it's got 3 lots, 4 lots on it. I think a private road situation, you know, could be an acceptable alternative.
and what we learned there is that's my road, stay out. And
Because it's private in regards to additional traffic coming off of 145, I think that part of that, the reasoning behind that was because the kids feel safe playing on the backside of that road, and they were fearful of other people and traffic coming in there looking for their event, not knowing exactly where it is because we're from out of town, and I think it's this road. Oh, let's turn here. Here's a road. And then there's, you know, kids playing out around one of the bends, and maybe we're going a little bit too fast. That was their concern more than anything in regards to traffic. So that's why they said it was a private road. And in some cases, they're justified based on what they're paying for an HOA fee to keep up that road. So yeah, it is theirs. They're paying for it.
I said at the village board meeting, that's an attractive nuisance. You have a conservation subdivision. This is supposed to be a wonderful environment. I want to go down that road and see what it's like.
Not everybody's you.
Yeah, but it's not any different than the 40-acre lot with the farmhouse that's in the middle of the property and a gravel road leading from the road, and you can't see the house or anything. And there's a sign out front that says, keep out private property. Not everybody's going to go tooling down the gravel road just to see what they can't see.
Yeah, and I think this is a small microcosm of what that looks like. I think we really want it on a bigger scale in order to preserve the land and not have it chewed up into 5-acre lots, much like his earlier graphs were showing in regards to the projection of 2,100 households coming in by the time this plan matures.
I somewhat agree with you, but I got to recognize what people are doing. Is this a real opportunity? Is really a potential solution with all these other issues that we're bringing up? Do we have to rethink this? That's all I'm saying. Is I think the concept is good, but we really got to think through the details on it. A lot of discussion as to all the ramifications of what is currently shown as what I call the lollipop, the cul-de-sac scenario.
So you're looking to flush out all the possibilities of what kind of subdivision or development this could bring, rather than take them on a case-by-case basis as to what's projected by the developer as they bring them. Because right now we're looking for generalities of zoning and what type of district we want to create or what type of zoning we want to have in this area based on the development we want to occur up to 2050. I don't know all those situations that could occur between now and 2050, but the developers come forward and propose them. And we then say as a plan commission, yeah, we think this works here, or we like the way it looks here, or no, this doesn't fit, you know, the plan of what we wanted for this area because we don't like the lollipops. We like something that's a little bit more, you know, more than 6 or by 10, or for this area in this land, we'd like to see 20. and not just 6. I think it becomes a waste. But what we're looking to do is to keep large masses of the rural area open. Otherwise, you're going to get them chewed up and blocked up by a bunch of 5-acre lots, and it's not going to look rural. It's going to look cookie cutter with all 5 acre lots out there.
Yeah, clearly the intent is there, and the intent appears to be a good intent. Do you want to hash out some of these issues before a developer comes in, not necessarily at tonight's meeting, but horses, size of the lots, private versus public roads? Do we want to understand those before a developer comes in, or are we going to wait for a developer?
So
No, I think we can.
Would be hashed out
some of those
before, as
issues.
that land use starts to get approved and proposed going forward. Right now, we're just looking for ways to preserve that area. And let's face it, we know a lot of that environmental corridor is wet. And as you head up to that northeast corner and you get into the into the Germantown swamp or wilderness park, whatever you want to call it, it's some pretty spongy land in there, and your development is limited more to a smaller range than it is to 40 lots.
Mm-hmm. You were saying, Jeff?
No, I was going to say that there certainly are some issues that need to be fleshed out a little bit more. For example, right now, as a result of some code changes that were made a few years back, for any subdivision under current rules, we first discount or subtract out any environmentally sensitive land from the total before we calculate density and number of lots. With this approach, are we going to do the same thing, or are we going to give some level of credit for land that's environmentally sensitive in terms of providing effectively a bonus, if you will, for somebody to do a conservation subdivision, create smaller lots, and preserve wider swaths of environmentally sensitive land under a new approach. There's a lot of things that we'll need to touch upon as we move forward. How to accommodate horses and horse developments of that sort of thing. We can certainly come up with ways to deal with that. Maybe in the end, we're not talking a minimum lot size of a half an acre and a minimum open space requirement of 60%. Maybe it's more like a minimum lot size of an acre and a minimum open space requirement of 30%. Either way, the concept is essentially the same, but we may be able to address some of your concerns by adjusting some of those parameters as we move forward.
Yeah, what I would hate to happen, I'd hate to have the fight where a developer comes in, presents his plan based on 30 acres and says, I'm entitled to X number of lots. And we come back and say, well, no, you have to discount for all the wetlands that you can't build on, so you can only build so many lots. Well, I'd rather have that discussion before a developer comes in rather than after, because after he comes in, it's a fight.
Right, and we would lay out what the rules are up front.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be clear. We would establish those parameters before we considered any development, and
Yeah.
developers would have access to that.
And that's more so what I'm getting at is I can ask 20 questions about this that a developer is going to come forward and see the opposite opinion that we want. So I'd rather hash out a bunch of this stuff before developers come in as opposed to after.
Okay, well, certainly we can consider in how to address the situation of raising horses. The whole private versus public road concept, we can discuss further.
I think to be clear too, what we're proposing, without looking at your existing regulations with, wetlands and calculation of open space, but the density is not changing from a subdivision standpoint. So if this property owner said, I want to, create as many lots as I can on my 33 acres, it's 6 lots right now, according to regulation. What we're proposing is the exact same amount of density, but it basically says it needs to be a conservation design. So I'm showing half-acre lots, but these could be 1-acre lots as well, and still be 6 lots. The open space then would reduced a little bit, but the intent again is that it's the same density, so essentially the same number of lots, but just more open space.
Yeah, and I'm comfortable with the conservation subdivision. It's just I keep pushing for more and more detail. Go forward.
So I think the detail, and you know, maybe before I go into that, I do have my next slide just gives kind of after the comprehensive plan, you know, what you should really start to put into ordinance form, basically, which I think is what I'm hearing potentially. And I'll circle back to this slide, but I want to make sure we've heard from 1 or 2 individuals. Are there any other plan commissioners, I guess, that have questions or comments on what we've talked about so far?
I have an additional question about this. I imagine there's plenty of properties in this corridor that we're talking about that are right now 5 acres, 7 acres, 12 acres, 15. They're under 20. And if, you know, people might have purchased those with the intent to build a house and on them or whatever, and currently they probably could. So how do you handle that? As we have all these smaller parcels that are already there, people already purchased the land and hoping they can build a house on it. You know, are they going to be able to build a house if they have 12 acres or 7 acres or 5?
Yes, they would be able to. Either under the current prevailing zoning that applies to the property, or simply by virtue of the policy in the plan that says you're enabled to develop at least one house on a given tract of land.
So if there's a tract of land that's 5 acres right now, or something 7, even if you could, even if it wasn't, the zoning wasn't changed ever on it from maybe agricultural to like R1, in the future they could still develop a house on that piece of property?
If it's a platted lot, certainly, and if that's the case, then it's likely that they already have the zoning that they need in order to develop a home on it. Anything less than 10 acres, even a 10-acre parcel in the A2 district is enabled to develop one residential house on it under the current zoning regulations. The situation where it gets a little bit dicier is questionable is the fact that there may be, for example, a property owner, more typically a farmer who's got 3 40-acre tracts. Each one has a separate tax parcel number, but for development purposes, they own 120 acres. Now, under the prevailing proposal here, the 1 per 20, you know, they could split each of those 40s into 2 20s and presumably put a house up on it under the concept we're talking about right now. But that wouldn't be necessarily what we would want to encourage people to do, but that option would be available to them to do that.
Yeah.
As it stands now, if you're sitting on, say, for example, 8 acres of land and it's zoned RS1 with a minimum 5-acre parcel size requirement, the owner may very well have visions of, you know, I bought this to divide it into 2 parcels and give one parcel to one of my kids over time, but they don't have a vested right to do that under the current zoning. Right now, they have a vested right for a minimum 5-acre parcel, and if they have 8 acres, they can't divide it any further.
All right.
Jeff, earlier in the meeting, you mentioned something that wasn't done. To economics, or was it the land itself that we haven't really had any other kind of private development done as a conservation subdivision, you know, absent the village kind of putting restrictions around it?
Well, I'm sorry, Tony, you broke up a little bit at the beginning, but I think I understand the gist of your question. The second phase, or north part of Prairie Glen, when I mentioned it developed in a manner that wasn't quite the same as the original Prairie Glen with the same conservation subdivision concepts. That's not to say they didn't set aside some open space, but the percentage was smaller, the lot size was larger. And the whole reason behind it, according to the developer, was simply this is what the current market is we think is we can sell more quickly than any other type of development approach. And so we didn't have a requirement that they develop the north part in the same manner with the same lot size and density and open space requirement as the south part. So we were in a position of having to try and negotiate with them something that was closer or somewhere in between what they originally proposed, which had very little open space, and something that came closer to resembling the south part of Prairie Glen, which ultimately is what was approved. Which sort of brings us to a point where, you know, we talk about these concepts and we talk about them, how they're beneficial for the preservation of rural character and appearance and the quality of life. The fact is that it's not always the easiest concept to implement. And in some cases, that's enough for property owners to say, oh, I don't want to do this if I don't have to. So if it's voluntary, in some cases, it may never happen. And the prevailing development patterns may continue. So, we're talking about creating a policy for the plan and ultimately changing the zoning code in a manner that would make this conservation subdivision approach essentially a requirement in the code for future development in the rural preservation areas.
Thank you.
Any other questions from any plan commissioners or comments?
I guess I've got a few things. I guess I would say I generally agree with the idea. I think these concepts, the rural preservation or the conservation subdivision concept makes a lot of sense. I like the options that you've laid out here on this particular slide. But I also do agree that we should really do our best to try to provide some guidelines or some definitions or try to identify those things that could be either negotiable or non-negotiable when we get proposals brought before us. But in general, I think this is a great idea, and we should try to incorporate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
And I think
maybe
it's an education process where everyone's going to think that the 5 acre, 20 acre is going to protect the land and keep it more wide open, where when you're showing the density and what type of land mass it takes up based on the projection of houses or additional units that are becoming in the next 15 to 20 years. If you really want to preserve that area, then the best way to do it is to make it a smaller, environmentally safe, not safe, but environmentally protected subdivision. That's how the larger tracts are protected, and that's how they're maintained and kept more of an open span, rather than trying to just punch out a bunch of 5 acre or 20 acre lots. And that's an education process. People think that a larger lot means more spread out, more rural, where it really doesn't. In some cases, it just puts more area of houses in a kind of a concentrated 20 acres. You could have, 6 houses there, depending on, where that 20 acres lies. So I think it's an important education process to show what it means and how it keeps that rural aspect open. And the question has to be asked, is that what you want? Is that what you want for this area of Germantown? Do you want it to maintain its rural character? Because we hear that time and time again on the surveys, we want Germantown to maintain. We like it because of its rural aspect. Well, in order to do that, these are some of the things that need to be put in place for that to occur.
And I have
I would
another
echo
follow-up question for Jeff. I don't know if I understand the A2 zoning and A1, but for A2, is it a minimum of 10 acres or a minimum of 10 acres to have A2 zoning?
Yes, the current minimum is 10 acres.
And And is there for an A1 is just anything, a 40 acre, 80 acre, anything above that?
A1 is a minimum of 35.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, is there any way for someone in this new plan scenario, if they have a 40 acre, could they divide it into 4 A2 lots and have 4 houses on those lots, the 10 acre lots?
Well, I guess that would be an option if we wanted to preserve that option and carry over the existing A2 zoning code and allow its application in the rural preservation area.
See,
One of the things we certainly need to consider is, are we going to leave open an option that allows people to divide land into large parcels and avoid having to go through or create a conservation subdivision approach? Right now the thought is that we would make it mandatory, move the density around. So if you're going to just split off less than 5 lots, either individually or maybe a 3-lot area that they need to maintain the density of 1 per 20. I suppose we could create another option where if somebody only wanted to split off 1 parcel, if they presented us a concept plan that was approved and it was somehow recorded against the balance of the property that showed how creating a one parcel could fit into a future conservation subdivision development or division of that property in the future, that might be an option we could include. Craig, I don't know if you've had any experience like that.
Yeah, I'm thinking through the A2 option with 10 acre lots. How we right now we're presenting this was saying that it would be this 1 to 20 density, but could be the 1 to 10. And yeah, I guess, Jeff, I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now, but I mean, we went back and forth even of this, is it 1 to 20 or 1 to 10 for this rural preservation area as well? And we kind of erred on, 1 to 20 to really try to push for more of the conservation subdivision, that property owners could get more lots and still preserve that rural character.
See, to me, I think, with those conservation subdivisions, you're not going to, you're going to preserve a lot of the land and get the rural feel of it. Like Mr. Baum was saying, you probably aren't going to get as many horses and chickens and the types of things you think of in a rural area. And I'd like to see some hobby farms and some more diversity than just 20 acre lots and then, dense lots, or I guess they're not dense, but small lots in a big area. Like the option of having 10 acre hobby farms in the area kind of seems important to me.
Well, certainly, another option would be if somebody wanted to develop some property and they had a prospective purchaser who wanted 8 acres so they can have a couple of horses. It's not out of the question that the developer, the owner, could develop a conservation subdivision, depending upon the number of acres, could create 10 1-acre lots, and then simply we could allow for 8 of those lots to be essentially combined into 1 8-acre parcel. I don't know, Craig, if you have any experience with that, but you're basically taking your conservation subdivision lots and combining them to create a larger parcel if somebody wants to have a larger parcel.
I think the key in my mind would be the density again. So it is dependent on kind of the larger total development area, but there's, different communities will set specific lot minimum and or maximum sizes, but
right.
Conservation subdivision could still include 5-acre lot sizes if there was, attractive land large enough to still adhere to that 1 to 5 acres. And I think in some of these areas, where we're looking at 100 plus acres of land, you know, you still can have lots, and all the lots don't need to necessarily be the same size. So I think it would still allow for flexibility for a developer to come in and have, you know, a couple lots a little bit smaller, and then you have a larger lots in a different cluster of five lots together. So there's definitely flexibility. I think the density is what you don't want to change, and kind of be understanding that this 1 to 5 makes sense. And the reason it makes sense to me is that it's a common kind of density that you do see in rural areas, but then also it's existing, comparable to what's existing today. So I think it's easy to say that you're not necessarily changing a big amount. You know, if this was a large 200-acre tract of land, you could still have 5-acre parcels and have a conservation subdivision with a large amount of open space.
And I think one of the things we might need to keep in mind as we go forward is, at what point do we stray from a policy of trying to preserve the rural character and appearance and quality of life in order to simply accommodate the desires of an individual property owner who's looking to buy an 8-acre tract in the village of Germantown because it happens to be convenient for them given where they work or where they play. You know, yes, it would be an ideal world if we could accommodate all of that, but I think ultimately our priorities are probably going to be trying to preserve the rural character and quality of life for those that are already here, and not necessarily simply trying to bend to accommodate the future needs of future residents who want 8 acres instead of 4 acres, or they want 10 acres instead of 1 acre. Now, having said that, I'm sure we're going to hear from some large property owners who are relying on their property as their retirement account and looking for future land division to help them financially as time goes on. I think in large measure that was a good deal of what was heard back in the early 2000s when the plan was being kicked around, and the discussion was, you know, is 1 per 20 too restrictive? Hey, let's go to 1 per 5 and free up the ability for property owners to create and sell off lots.
I think it is good, and I appreciate the comment of, you know, still allowing for, you know, potential for hobby farms to come in, and that A2 zoning size, I think is something Jeff will circle back with and communicate with the Plan Commission. I think that is something good to consider here.
Yep, I agree.
Doesn't that conservation subdivision, Jeff, pretty much get you or those large landholders where they need to be? I mean, at the end of the day, does on the far right, those 6 lots, what would those sell for per lot versus on the left, the small, you know, the 5-acre lots? I assume the dollars per square foot go up.
How much did your Redwood lots sell for? Those are 1/4 acre or 1/2 acre?
Those are closer to 1/4 acre, 15 to 20,000 square feet. I'm trying to remember what the prices were on those. Probably in the 70s to hundreds. I know
It's that they sell the 6 acres in the right-hand column will sell for as much as the 6 acres in the left-hand column.
Yep, I would agree.
Yeah, new construction of lots, you know, that I'm seeing throughout Southeast Wisconsin are, you know, base values starting at 300,000 with a home on it, and that's on the lower end. So I would be surprised if you're getting a lot lower with different types of new developments in Germantown right now like this.
So those lot holders on the right side will pay for that common land. It doesn't create a diminishment of value, is what I'm hearing.
And if you also bring water and sewer to the right column because they're closer together, you could sell them for a premium if you can get water and sewer there.
Mm-hmm. which makes it more efficient to do that. Right.
Right.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on some of these things. I know it's a lot of text here, but the thought process, as this is a comprehensive plan that we're engaged with right now, which is typically a little bit more high level. We can get into a little bit more detail, but what the recommendation would be with this comprehensive plan that you adopt, hopefully, is that we establish that there's this new density requirement for the rural preservation area, and then there'd be a recommendation basically that says the village should enact a new ordinance or specific regulation that guides what these conservation, regulations are. And we've already talked a lot about those. This is a list of different things that are typically included with conservation subdivisions. Now, if this is, what I'm hearing tonight, and Jeff, we can circle back, but if this is something where you think it's beneficial to have a draft, ordinance, in hand, as well as we continue to go through this comprehensive planning process, we can obviously do that and help do that. But the thought process is, if the comprehensive plan is adopted in July, that, immediately following that this year, we're pursuing the creation of a new ordinance that guides conservation subdivision design.
Yeah, I think at a minimum, we should have a set of parameters like what you've got on the screen that speaks to some of those basic concepts, the lot size, the density, the open space requirement, lot size minimums, lot size maximums, if that's applicable, some potentially options in between, and how the open space is dealt with, because that's always a question that comes up. Who owns it? Why are we creating it? Isn't it just taking land off the tax roll and so forth? So those things, I think, can be addressed through coming up with a basic set of parameters like you've got on the screen. And so it wouldn't be difficult to pull those together for what we're talking about in the rural preservation area. And even the conservation subdivision approaches we're talking about applying in the rural neighborhood areas that may be slightly different than this in terms of the density allowances and lot sizes.
Hey, Craig, my experience with these type of developments is through Seepman Realty. Do you know if they're still building the conservation subdivisions?
That's a good question. I know that's a name that rings a bell with me.
And they're predominantly out in the Heartland, Pewaukee, Sussex area is where I remember seeing them.
Well, you'd be surprised. You might be surprised to learn that right next door in the village of Richfield, predominant development pattern there is conservation subdivision design. It's been on the books for a number of years, and it's I don't know to what extent they're still maintaining the requirement, but I believe it's essentially the type of development pattern that they prefer to see in their community.
And they have no water and sewer, so they have to have a standard that allows for well and septic in a denser orientation.
Yes, my familiarity with it, years ago, the density allowance was basically 1 per 3 acres. They had a minimum open space requirement of 40% and a minimum lot size of 1.25 acres. I think it may even be down to 1 acre now, but they've gone through those issues about developing parameters and the like. And we've even heard from some of our own folks in meetings over the last year that they want to see a development pattern like the village of Richfield. So I don't know if you want to blame it on them, but we're heading down that path where we're going to be probably, if not including as an option, hopefully as a requirement, having a similar development pattern that tries to preserve our rural character and quality of life and appearance.
Jeff, anything else on this topic or questions from plan commissioners that we wanted to make sure to discuss?
The only thing I would ask, David, maybe we can hook up outside of the meeting, but in addition to the couple of things that you brought up tonight, you said you had close to 20 issues that you thought we would need to address, and I'd like to get a better idea of exactly what those are so we can start addressing them.
I will start thinking them through and put a list together for you.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
I thought maybe you had those already.
I have several from people I've talked to, but they slipped my mind at this particular moment.
If we get into too much detail as we present that, people will glom onto that and think that that's what we want to propose there, where it's really more of a preservation of the land. And we could come up with the ordinance with their input as that develops. But right now, we're just looking at scenarios of going forward with the plan to show how that preservation could occur.
Yeah, that's why I didn't get into too much detail on it.
I think that's a great point, Dean, as well. That at our future meetings that we're having, that's the time to hear and for people to comment on, well, what about my horses, or what about the natural areas? Who's going to own this common space? What do these lots sell for? All those are definitely answerable and get into the details, but yeah, sometimes if it's too much information, it kind of misses the point of just more the general idea, which is trying to conserve this rural character. Okay. Then if I'm not hearing anything else on this, what we can do just to help, I can share this presentation with staff who can share it with you as well, just to have this content that was not in your packet. If we do move to the packet, Jeff, if we wanted to just walk through that with the next maybe 10, 20 minutes here. So what was included in the packet was a general outline for our March 22nd community-wide meeting. And this is planned to be, again, a completely virtual meeting. So what Grace pulled together here is just a general outline of what this meeting would look like. And then we also shared some potential imagery for an interactive survey that we would have within this 1 hour time block for this virtual meeting that gets to some of the potential design, character, and looks of the village center area, as well as the Holy Hill industrial area, and some types of subdivision design criteria as well. Since that was in your packet, maybe I won't do a full presentation, I guess, or reiterate everything, but more maybe first ask, was there any questions or comments on the potential outline for the meeting and the visual preference survey?
I had a question for you, Craig. When you say the village center / Mequon Road, are you talking or traditional village center and Mequon Road, the two parallel corridors?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's definitely going to be a shift from, I think, what residents are familiar with. Village center is referencing a new boundary as part of this kind of neighborhoods, districts, and corridors plan. And the village center is inclusive of essentially the main heart or kind of center of Mequon Road, from the railroad tracks essentially on the east to the Menominee River kind of crossing. I'm blanking on the north-south road here, but is it Maple Division thing? Or no,
I'm sorry, River Lane.
Yeah, River Lane. And then inclusive of Main Street area as well. So the name Village Center was kind of meant to incorporate both the activities of Mequon Road and your existing Main Street, but start to not think of them as separate things, but how can future developments and existing conditions tie those two together, so that yes, they're still unique maybe in different areas, but people feel like they've arrived at the center of Germantown when they're in this general vicinity.
Okay.
Does that answer?
Yeah, it's a great answer. Just as long as folks, you present the map essentially first, because people will just jump to conclusions, right?
Yep. No, that's a good point. Thank you.
Why are we doing this meeting virtually?
I'm not aware of a good way to have an in-person meeting right now with COVID restrictions. But if there's an idea out there that we haven't thought through, please let me know.
I get far less out of a meeting when it's virtual than I do when it's in person.
Well, we're trying to sort of bridge the both desires for safe personal safety and trying to encourage as much participation as possible. My hope is that by we get closer to the end of the process, June, July, that we'll be in a better position to have in-person meetings. But at this point, I think some of the tools that we have employed are best done so through a virtual meeting setting. And so that's what we're striving to do at this point.
Is it possible to look at the format where you could spread it out along something, whether it be one of the school facilities or at the library, so it's bigger, but then still limit the number of people that can come into the room to 25 or whatever you wanted to do? But perhaps you could put some additional monitors out in the lobby so that people could see the presentation and then allow them to come in and ask questions with certain stations that would address it.
I just participated in the reconstruction of Wasaki Road at one of the elementary schools, and they spread everything out in the gymnasium, and lo and behold, everybody sat next to each other in the end. And Grafe, you guys put that meeting on.
Well, I can appreciate the desire to try and get back to some sense of normalcy and maybe in a manner of participation that might get some individuals to attend versus a virtual meeting. But I'll be honest with you that at this point, the train is somewhat left the station. We're sending out postcards, inviting people to participate and directing them to our social pinpoint website and explaining, how they can participate virtually. And to change that at this point, I would prefer not to, if we can.
All right, then I would ask that we gauge how well it goes and the participation that occurs, and then make a decision afterward if something else needs to be done. As a follow-up, to say, okay, we didn't get what we wanted out of here. It was difficult for this reason, or we really didn't get the participation we wanted. So try, just hold a plan B so that we can look at something else. And then you can announce that and give information on that rather than try to pull back information and then re-release, where that always comes confusing and you'll get, less than you expected to begin with.
Well, I think we certainly will take the results of this meeting and consider that, as well as where we are, COVID wise, a month, 2 months from now. And we probably, I'm hopeful that we'll be in a position where we can have an in-person meeting, and maybe the virtual component is more of a convenience that we offer, but encourage more in-person direct participation. But at this point, we're sort of tied to doing the virtual meeting that we're talking about.
Another question of Craig. What's an opportunity area? I was going to say opportunity zone, opportunity area.
Sure. So the thing that we even discussed tonight could generally be described, the rural preservation area, as, you know, opportunity areas, but more specifically what we're highlighting or focusing for Germantown is our village center, and what's at the previous plan commission meeting showed for development of the Blackstone property and specific intersections along Mequon Road. So that's an opportunity area for kind of change or redevelopment. And then the second area would be the Holy Hill Gateway area, where we've shown different development scenarios, again, for both industrial, commercial development and residential development. So those opportunity areas would be included in the presentation, and also allow for people to look at the plans that have been drawn so far and provide feedback on those. Any other questions?
Yeah, Craig, this is Bill Shadid. I just had one, and I hate to do this to you. Can you go back to your presentation and go to page 7?
Yes.
I kind of think you covered it, but I'm just kind of questioning a bit here. If you have the scenario to the right, where you have the 6 properties on the large property, you know, yes. All right. What kind of restrictions do you put on that property for the area outside the lots? I mean, is it maybe you say, all right, you can have farmland in there, maybe you grow trees, maybe you let it go natural, I don't know. But how much limit do we put on that? I mean, let me give you an example. We talked about horses tonight. What if 4 of the people on the 6 lots decide they'd like to put up a horse barn on the common property? That's just a shot in the dark. But do we restrict things like that or not?
Yeah. So what I would say first is that every single conservation subdivision, like any subdivision, is going to be a different developer likely, or different property owner who's going to have a different vision for what they want to do. And the village, in my opinion, should support that to a certain level of degree that adds variety and excitement, and different types of markets that different people want. So what would happen basically is, for all the open space, there's basically an understanding and written out within deed restriction or HOA for what types of activities and use and conservation of space is planned for that entire area. So the idea that all 6 property owners would know that coming into this, that this is intended to be, let's just use it as an example, like the horse pasture community, where all these residents have their own stables, and I'm not saying that's large enough for any of this, but that's the intent. So it would be written and understood that any new potential property owner coming in buys into that vision and wants to be part of it. Now, there's obviously things that the village, you want to make sure we're not causing negative impacts to other adjacent properties. So that's where you need to put in certain regulations and standards for what we don't want to have occur, that would cause negative impacts to other properties.
Okay, so you do kind of leave it up to a point. You leave it within the confines of the 6 property owners. They have some flexibility up to the point where it interferes with the adjacent property owners.
Yeah, but
I just want to say that there is flexibility. That's correct.
Yeah, and it depends on how your ordinance would eventually be written, but typically it's I would compare it to your PUD process right now, where a developer is going to propose kind of what they want, and then there's kind of give and take, at your plan commission meetings, at their approval meetings, for what the village is actually comfortable with or not comfortable with.
Right. Okay. All right. That's kind of what I wanted to know, because I do think the timber of a subdivision like that can change. The original 6 owners may have a totally different view of things than the next 6 or the next 4 of those 6. So there needs to be flexibility long-term. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions or
Is
things
it
that I didn't touch on?
possible for us to put up a map somewhere like in the lobby that kind of shows the neighborhoods and districts that are being proposed so people can kind of get a look at it before the virtual meeting and get a better understanding of what that looks like?
I don't think I see an issue with that. What the plan was, just from a timing standpoint, you have your next plan commission meeting on the 8th, and Grafe had our internal deadline to basically have, the presentation, which I have the outline there, and materials, at least as a draft, that we would present. Jeff, we can circle back and see if there's any major changes with the map, but I think, Dean, to answer your question, in the second week of March, we could see that and post that physical map at the village.
And if it becomes an issue of output, you can give me that file, and we've got large plotters and digital presses where I work that I can put that out on any kind of board or foam core you want at whatever size you think is work best. And I know I could convince my boss to do that gratis.
That's great. I didn't know that service existed, and I'll connect with you offline for future projects that you can get paid for.
Yeah, I'll be starting taking orders tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing to keep in mind, our goal was to have the NDC map up on the Social Pinpoint website, ready for when the postcards go out, and when they're delivered, there's directions there to go to the Social Pinpoint site. So people will be able to, before the March 22nd meeting, go to that site and poke around, play with it, leave their comments and look at some of the details, sort of a pre-inspection, if you will, of that site before the meeting on the 22nd. The only issue would be is that unlike the meeting on the 22nd, where we will be giving instructions on sort of how to look at and navigate around the Social Pinpoint site, people will be somewhat on their own to do that if they choose to do so before the 22nd.
That's where one of my concerns comes in about this being virtual is at all the meetings that I've been to on these type of things, I like to roam around and listen to what people are saying. And they may not talk to officials, but they'll talk to each other, and you get a truer sense. I'm not sure I'm going to get the information that I'm looking for out of this. So,
isn't it really the idea for them to come back and do it via pinpoint? So that even if they have those discussions or thoughts, they can physically come in there and place them in the areas that they may, be concerned or have those ideas about.
The hour-long meeting is really not meant to be as much of a responding to questions or concerns, just because in our experience with this virtual setting is it can become too overwhelming and too time intensive, and respecting, if there's a participant, hopefully of, like 50 people, let's say, we get, that multiple people speaking over each other just is not a productive meeting. So the intent is really to guide people to the Social Pinpoint site and be able to provide freely your input there. But I would, just to address the comment that was just made, if there's absolutely the desire to be in person again, I definitely have that desire too. There's going to hopefully be that opportunity in the future to have that type of conversation. But the Social Pinpoint website is really meant to collect as much feedback as possible from people, not just during this meeting, but following that meeting for the remainder of the
And this
day.
is the kickoff that shows and brings everybody to that area so that they can start that.
Yep.
That whole launch.
Correct. And I know there was a question about pictures that I included here. The site allows for individuals to take their own personal pictures and upload them to this website to kind of share the character or likes or dislikes of a different comment that they may think a picture speaks more than words. And the thought with that is a lot of our comprehensive plans that GRAFE does, we utilize pictures from the community, from residents, from business owners. So it's kind of a fun way to allow people to submit pictures that maybe could end up in the actual adopted plan.
Okay, any other questions on the outline? Okay, anything else to cover then? As far as the meeting or the upcoming meeting?
No, Jeff, I don't have anything else.
Craig, you're all set then? That's basically the presentation that you had hoped for tonight?
Yep, that's everything that I had. If anyone has any follow-up questions, though, obviously let Jeff know, and Jeff and I talk every week, so we can make sure to get your questions or concerns addressed.
Okay, very good. Anything else from anyone else? Any announcements? No, not just for official. The meeting then again is, you want to just announce the meeting and time for the virtual meetings, just so people that are watching get a good idea of when it is and they can put it on their calendar right away?
Yes, it'll be on March 22nd. It's a Monday night, starting at 6:30 p.m.
All right, thank you. If there's nothing else and no other announcements, then we can be adjourned. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you all for watching and participating. I appreciate it very much. Have a good night.
Good night.